All righty. So good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to the December Indicators of Behavior subproject meeting for the Open Cybersecurity Alliance. My name is Charlie Frick. I'm your host and chair of the IOB subproject for OCA. And I know it's been a few months since our last meeting, so I thought I would start with giving a couple updates on the project, let you guys know what we're doing right now in indicators of behavior. Then I'll be giving our technical talk this quarter on ways to make behavioral detections, and then kind of open the floor up for discussion and capturing some issues and concerns across the project. So with that said, I'll dive right in. For the updates specifically to the Indicator of Behavior project, there's a few things. Earlier in the summer, we gave a short demo of a simple indicator of behavior bundle that we built utilizing network behavioral analytics based on the Argus network auditing software. We're fortunate to have Carter as a frequent member of this group, and he's the inventor of Argus. Well, I just wanted to make sure I share that we do have that small IOB sample bundle on the IOB GitHub page available as one of our reference implementations if anybody would like a copy of it. So that is available for download on the GitHub. Additionally, we're still using revision 3 as the main reference implementation of the indicator of behavior sample. That's the Reaper Lite campaign. I thought I'd share with the group, though, that we are capturing, even after a few years, we still occasionally find some typos in that JSON. And so we'll be making a couple minor updates to that eventually for revision 4 later on in 2025. Additionally, we are actively working here at the Applied Physics Lab with our sponsors at CISA for a Volt Typhoon indicator of behavior sample. And when we have that approved and released, we will gladly share. I am hopeful, emphasis on the hope, that we might have a version ready for the Open Cybersecurity Alliance Cyber Automation Village in the spring. But we've been doing some work here at the lab with some threat emulation and Volt Typhoon, as well as detection development, and are actively working to make that indicator of behavior bundle. Additionally, wanted to share some news for where things are going in indicators of behavior. Those of you that might have had a chance to catch the talk in October at Cyber Resiliency Day, we mentioned that there are two areas that we're really interested in for advancing IOB as a standard. One of those, we are continuing some of our look into ways that we capture network behaviors via automation, because we are very interested in the idea of leveraging automation. I don't throw the AI words around lightly, but the idea is eventually to let machines be able to help you identify emergent and abnormal behaviors based on different types of history for a network. We're still continuing that work some, but the other area that I mentioned is that we really need to pilot indicators of behavior in order to capture some of the operational insights and gain more support and feedback from the customer community, because it's always our intention that indicators of behavior as a way to standardize threat intel, it'll be mostly CTI providers and vendors that would provide the IOBs, and a lot of us and our tools would merely be using them. Well, for that to happen, we need people to actually use this and capture those. So that was my very long-winded way to be very glad to announce that under our work with CISA, we will be conducting an operational indicator of behavior pilot with the Hudson Alpha Institute for Biotechnology in Huntsville, Alabama. We are just kicking that work off right now, but the goal there is we'll be partnering with Hudson Alpha, who maintains a large campus in Huntsville for genomics and agricultural research. And basically, they also house a campus of about 40 different startups, and they are the landlord and internet service provider for those startups. And by partnering with Hudson Alpha, that gives us the ability to understand their network and to generate a few different indicator or behavior bundles along with their detection rules and correlation workflows so that we can actually put those in operations with their security team and capture some metrics on how that has improved security operations and get feedback on things that we could change with the standard. So as the year progresses, we'll be excited to share some of the findings and metrics from that pilot, but I wanted to share with this community that we have gotten all the agreements in place and we are kicking that work off right now and thought it'd be good for folks to know about. Any questions on some of those like initial bits of news before I kind of dive more into our technical talk today? Excellent. So as we are getting towards the end of the year, we have been working with some other communities on building job aids to help explain how one can build and use indicators of behavior. And one of the things that's really kind of come to light is there's still some confusion on why we're building these bundles with detection analytics and correlation workflows. So I thought today it would be good to kind of do a little deeper technical demo into why we do these detections the way that we do them and how we make them. So I'm going to start with a little bit of a live attack emulation of a simple campaign, and then take you guys through an indicator or behavior sample for it and show how we could make detections if all we were using were the attack patterns, kind of help demonstrate why that might not be ideal for a lot of our needs, and then showcase how we do that with the types of detection objects we build for indicators of behavior, and have a little chat on how you go from just sharing those detection rules to how it would be built for correlation logic. Just thought it might be a good way to help level set on what these detections really mean. Now, for today, I'm going to be taking you through a very simplistic threat emulation, extremely loosely based on the Volt Typhoon threat narrative. Internally, we've been calling this attack Spark Rainstorm. So this is a very, very simplistic attack. I don't claim to be a top tier cyber adversary, but I'll take you guys through the attack. At any point, feel free to ask questions and I'll be glad to field them. But the threat emulation should only take a few minutes, and then we can start looking into how that would be represented in a sample IOB bundle and take a look at some of the detection engineering steps that we would take. So let me attempt to share my screen. And I thought it'd be good to just start off with a fresh Cobalt Strike instance and just take you kind of through the process of how we emulate some of the threat activity in our research environment. So this is all internal to our research environment. I'm just showing this as an example of an attack. Again, I don't claim to be an expert malware developer or expert ethical hacker, just taking you through the steps and then talking about how we represent those steps. So here I have a C2 server set up and going to be using Cobalt Strike, not meant as an endorsement, just happens to be the tool I'm using today. So first thing I'd want to do is add a few listeners. And I can't talk and type at the same time, but I'm going to set something up for simple HTTP beaconing. And I think for pivoting later, I'm going to do probably an SMB beacon. So again, anybody here that does a lot of ethical hacking, I'm willing to admit that I'm using horrific tradecraft for the sake of a quick threat demo. but I'd also use horrific tradecraft if I was doing this for real because I'm a lousy hacker. But anyways, I set these listeners up so they're going to be listening across our infrastructure to see if the malware I generate calls home and gives us access to do our attack. So for that, I'll need to make a payload. So this will be my malware. I'll want it to talk to my HTTP beacon. And I'm going to just call it December 10th beacon. And then I'm going to host that on a simple web server. So that there. And I did this threat run last week, so we have an example in case I mess something up because it's a live demo and odds are strong that I'm going to mess something up. But the holidays are upon us, so I'll call this holiday exe. And now this is living on my C2 server. I'm now going to continue being having very lousy tradecraft, and I'm going to have a end user make a series of very bad cyber choices to step this up. 1.21. So this, whereas Build Typhoon does a lot of remote exploit and cred stuffing to start off with, for this very simple example, I'm just emulating a spearfish right now. So somebody goes on that link and there's a sketchy file. In this case, I'm using a very, very bad tradecraft. I'm going to ignore my warnings and keep that file. And I'm going to run it. And I should get a warning again, and I'm going to ignore those. Obviously, most modern malware will be much higher quality than what I just made in 10 seconds there. But just for the sake of discussion today, I launched that very simple payload, and now I've got a beacon on that initial victim. For the sake of discussion, we'll need to wait about 30 seconds for this to sync up. But I've gotten my initial foothold on a victim, and from there, let's see, we will wait another 20 seconds. That'll feel very long for this beacon to become interactive. I'll just task it to list the processes so we can verify that it's connected up. And at this point, so now I'm here. I'm going to be really simple today. And so what I probably would want to do is, I would want to dump the password hashes, and I can get a few there, and probably run Mimikatz to see if I can get any other saved credentials. Now I can look at my credential list, and I can see my domain. A lot of these are local accounts. I can see this J Smith user also is on the CBIS domain. So I have an idea of where these passwords might go and how they could be used. And I could download these hashes and attempt to crack them for the sake of time. I won't do that for y'all today, but we have done that in the past in our threat emulations. And so I get to, ruin my dev team's day today and show you the dummy password that we use for a lot of our testing inside our isolated test network. But I need more than just the hashes. So I also want to, once I get into a network like this, I'm going to want to be able to profile and learn what other systems are around. So I often will use PowerSploit. set of PowerShell scripts. So we will import that, and there's a particular one called PowerView that's quite handy. And now, once I've done that, I've now loaded those PowerShell scripts onto my victim, and I can take advantage of them. So I can say git domain computer. Hopefully I do this right. Well, I'm trying to remember. I'm not going to try and live remember all my PowerShell syntax, but because I wanted to make it a little simpler, but we'll just run this real quick. Should only take a moment, unless I killed my beacon. All right. And now I've got a lot of information about the other machines on my network. Again, this talk is really going to be about detection development, not Charlie's bad ethical hacking skills. So to make this a little simpler, I can use an even louder enumeration, run net computers, and I can see multiple potential targets on my network. And if I was looking for further targeting, I definitely see that I would be very interested in these domain controllers. And I see one called a historian, as well as an exchange server and a data server. These would be things that I'd be quite interested in. But for today, let's just see if I can jump over here. Now I'm going past a few bits here. If I had cracked these, I would have seen that administrator account also on the network. And I'm just going to attempt to jump over there. I'll use the SMB listener and pass my active session. Fingers crossed I don't mess this up. And we're giving it a moment. And at that point, just kind of visualize what I'm doing here. I had this user click on my malware, and now I'm tunneling through that initial victim over to a domain controller. And from there, I can see that I'm sitting there as system over on my domain controller. And if I wanted to, I could now make a copy of the NTDS database that I might want to use to download and crack additional credentials that I would then use to attempt to log into other systems on that network map. This part was being a little finicky with me this morning. So advanced apologies if this step fails, but that's why I do these we also test our demos ahead of time, and I have some saved artifacts from before. So, but I can now hang out here in the temp directory, and I'll attempt to make a copy. Again, not claiming this is good tradecraft today. I do something a little bit sneakier to inject this command, but today I'll just try the ntds util command. Instance. Hopefully I do this right. I'm just checking my spelling. And I can, job hasn't quite registered yet. Now it has. This might take some time. And for the sake of today's discussion, I might skip ahead, but just wanted to kind of show, we'll take a quick look. And right now, this particular one isn't populated, but I can show that that command previously, so this is one from about last month where I was testing, we could make a copy of the NTDS database as well as the system database. These are what we would need to exfiltrate from the victim network uh, in order to essentially get all the hashes for all the user accounts in that Active Directory. And then we would crack those offline and use those creds to further our access across the network. So real baby cyber attack there. Not sure if this guy finished. We'll let that cook for a little while because that was just well, not the most exciting thing on earth. That was just a simple example of one of the types of cyber attacks for somebody getting access into a network, doing a little bit of reconnaissance, and copying credential databases. So I mentioned that because I want to talk about this in terms of indicators of behavior. So here is a real simple chain of behaviors in dark blue that were generated from that little demonstration I just showed. Essentially, that computer ran an executable from an abnormal place. By abnormal, I mean from the downloads folder in this one. We used PowerSploit and PowerView to upload some PowerShell scripts to a Numerator network and made a copy of the NTDS database. Now, I want to not just say that's a chain of observable behaviors, and this is not dependent on the particular piece of malware being used, but essentially want to say, how does one find this chain of events? Well, to start with, one could simply write a report and include attack patterns out of MITRE ATT&CK. Again, we're big fans of MITRE ATT&CK. It gives us a nice common language. And here are examples where we've uploaded from MITRE's enterprise attack STIX repository the relevant attack patterns. And so we have the upload malware, use of PowerShell, and credentials stolen from password stores, TTPs. What I want to get at is, unfortunately, when we only deal with the MITRE attack patterns, it can be really, really challenging to translate those into useful detections. And so I'm going to, if you all hit the I believe button with me, 1 week ago, I went through this whole kill chain so I could generate some stuff into our SIEM and show some of the challenges that arise when you're strictly trying to translate an attack pattern into actionable analytics. So for that first attack pattern, the uploading malware, let's see, we got ourselves T1608.001. As I looked it up on the attack matrix, I get some kind of generic descriptions. So for kicks, I kind of took that generic description and I fed that into ChatGPT just to see if I could find any type of detection analytic and said, hey, I've got an enterprise environment and I'm collecting Sysmon event 1, write me a Splunk search. And it wrote me one. And initially, we might say, oh, look, how amazing this is. It actually found some stuff. However, upon further inspection, especially in this command line argument, what this really found, and I'm not want to discount it, it's actually amazing that I found anything by just saying a MITRE attack number and that I had Sysmon logs. But this analytic actually is finding that little test URL. That is just Edge testing that the download link would actually download a file from there. And that, while was indicative in this particular kill chain, isn't really showing anything related to my malware. This would happen anytime I was downloading a file. Now, similarly, I searched some of the other attack. I took, say, the PowerShell enumeration, and I went online to some free analytic repositories for Sigma rules or Splunk searches, just kind of playing the role of a network defender, reading this report, trying to do something with it to go find this threat activity. And when it said looking for PowerShell, I had a few hundred analytics to choose from, and I'd need to go, if I didn't know better, I need to go through each one. And for those of you that might be able to read this, I can try and make it bigger. This isn't necessarily terribly indicative of what I was doing when I uploaded that PowerShell and used that to enumerate the network. So not surprisingly, I didn't find anything. And for copying the passwords from credential stores, I also had dozens upon dozens of analytics to look at, and I'd need to go through each one. This first one I found, this really didn't have much of anything to do with what I was searching for, and not surprisingly, I didn't find anything. So that's why in these IOB bundles, it's why we share these detection analytics, where we really look to emulate this type of threat activity and then search for the most common data sources that we can find, normally endpoint logs and characteristics of network activity. Try to not be too tied into proprietary formats. We do heavily use Windows event logs and things like NetFlow and Argus to characterize the patterns in the network activity and write up our detections for how one could observe these symptoms happening on the machine that's affected or the network that's affected. And the goal there is to focus more on what is happening rather than precisely how the attacker is doing it. With our argument, that will make a more repeatable set of detections. Inside these detection objects are base64 encoded rules. We want to see an example of that. You can extract and decode those, and that's in Sigma format. And the reason we're doing Sigma in this example, let's see, I'll show you. It's a YAML format, but what's handy about it is there's a large number of free tools that let us translate that. So I can, hopefully I do this right. So let's say I wanted to convert it to into a Splunk query. I can get the logic that I can then go send to my Splunk. Or let's say I had something look more like an Elastic Stack. I can make sure that these things look the way that they need to look and understand the formatting for how I'd want this uploaded. Now, why all that's important to us, I'll go back and show how some of these detections. So now, instead of that kind of attack pattern based one, I really said, I want to search for a program executing from an odd place. And so I want to find program execution where it's not launching from a directory with Windows, program files, program data, or app data. For full transparency, by the nature of how we installed a few things in our environment, I also added a few more things to exclude from the search. But this was done on December 4th, where I kind of went through the exact same kill chain that I just demoed at the beginning of this talk. And what you quickly find is I can see that the Holiday exe was being executed from the downloads folder. Now, this, as one doing detection engineering might say, this could obviously have lots of false positives. There could be lots of legitimate reasons why a user would want to execute something from downloads or desktop. But we're just starting with that, with the idea that this will be processed by automation, and we can correlate fields from these events. Here, I'll needed to run that in verbose mode if I wanted to get the events. And I'm now searching everything from our environment that day. But I could, look at the other fields in the event that I would want to query against. We'll come back to that in a second. Similarly, for the detection analytic for the use of PowerView, I can start looking through certain logs for whenever PowerShell scripts are uploaded that include enumeration commands. Now, this might not be the best analytic, but I was just trying to show an example of, instead of looking across any use of PowerShell, I wanted to look at PowerShell that was taking advantage of a fairly popular network reconnaissance tool heavily used in a lot of open source hacking material. And I can search for anytime PowerShell was uploaded with where the script block was defining the get domain computer and get net computer, which are both part of that PowerView PS1 script, and rapidly said, hey, I can find that did fire over here on this machine. And I can look at these other fields that I might want to correlate against. And then finally, instead of just randomly searching for all different ways to dump credentials, the real credential theft stuff that I was looking at in this example was copying that NTDS database. And so instead of just sharing that attack pattern, I really want to say, let's look for whenever this database is copied. And that's event code 325 in Windows, if you're curious. And we said, let's also look for when NTDS might be in the message. And that told me that, hey, at this time on this machine, we made ourselves a brand new ntds.dit copy. And that is something that is going to be, again, it doesn't matter what exploit I use to get into the network. It doesn't matter what CVE was used. It doesn't matter which malware, which APT campaign, what technique. If they want to copy the NTDS database using a living off the land technique, at some point, the machine has to make a copy of the database, and it does log that. So let's look strictly for that. Again, there could be false positives. So how we normally address that is, and I don't have that in this technical talk today for the sake of time, but that's where we then go into the next step of building out a correlation workflow, ideally in an open format like Cacao, to be able to share the correlation logic to compare across these alerts so that a SOAR or other type of automation, maybe an EDR, can start making these correlations to say, within this time frame, did the same computer that are the same accounts execute this command? Were they involved in other behavioral alerts? And live demos always have some failure. And how we normally will do that is we'll turn these detections into SIEM alert indices. And that's what our automation will look over. Not to go into a deep dive, but just showing an example of how that could be a lot more effective. We've been using this environment and this SIEM for quite some time. And so I'll even run this search right now across all my alerts, and pretty quickly, I'm pulling up all my events, and here, that was not too bad to get roughly about just shy of 3 months worth of triggered alerts. These are all running in the background, not to be put in front of a human, until a correlation workflow sees that within proper time periods, multiple sets of alerts had fired. And that's kind of what we're looking to share with our community with the types of detections we make indicators of behavior, rather than the ones based strictly on attack patterns or based strictly on indicators of compromise, which can, as most of us know, expire very rapidly. So with that, I'll stop there for a moment and see if anybody had some concerns, questions, comments on what I was just talking about with that little demonstration. But that's kind of a snippet of the type of detection guidance that we're putting into our job aid and the explanations that we use for doing some of these types of threat emulation. So I'll pause for a moment. Are there any questions or comments from folks? So I'll take that as either I did a fantastic job or I did a horrible job, and everybody is asleep right now. But it looks like Carter came off mute.
Yeah, so Charlie, you were saying towards the end how excited you were that you could make some of these detections without knowing about the techniques used underneath them.
Correct.
Because they can be so varied and all that kind of stuff. So, I'm the guy that wants to be on the other end of that spectrum because I think that there are only a fundamental number of very low-level attack behaviors that can lead to all of these variations that can finally lead you to this type of an attack. So I can see the advantages of having multiple points of detection interest to get to that first lowest part and to get to the highest part. Because I think that the biggest interest is, for me, is going to be in correlating these two different dimensions. Because I'm expecting, if I see this on the bottom, I'm expecting something on the top. And I think that might actually lead to more interesting behavioral analytics. So I very much appreciate you going to one end. I'm going to want to drag you back over to the lower end. But, to do this same process at different points in the chain simultaneously and try to find disparities between the multiple, observation areas, if you will. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. I just thought it might be good today just to help, because it's pretty consistent feedback I've gotten over the last year and a half. So is we have the MITRE attack pattern. Why are we writing detections? And I kind of wanted to show how that might be a little bit large of a search space for automation or people trying to figure out how to make sense out of this, because it's hard.
I think it's really important. I mean, you still have to do false positive rejection, and you need strength in the conviction of what you're wanting about to say. Wanting about to say, I like that phrase. So, but I'm thinking that it all has to come together in this behavioral analytic, because in some ways, to me, these are still very similar to just very complex pattern matching. So, but I think this is very good. And I like the fact that, I don't know about the ChatGPT part.
It's near the holidays. I thought it'd be a little snarky to see like how, if I wanted to go to like my most, luckily I am a clueless, engineer, but I thought let's take what do I think is the bottom level? Okay, I'll throw the attack pattern to ChatGPT and ask it to tell me what to search for.
I'm
to show
amazed
the lowest. I was shocked that I got anything.
I'm amazed too. I mean, it's pretty impressive. So, but
it'd be I wouldn't want to stake my organization's security stack on that search.
Oh, no. But, I like the notion that you can try to generalize this process and if you can do the same process at multiple parts of this chain or this kind of hierarchy of complexity or whatever, however you want to describe it, I think that's really a huge contribution. So I'm pretty plussed up on it. So
cool. I'm glad to hear that. All righty. So with that said, I know that took up a little bit of a chunk of our time today. I hope it wasn't too boring for most of y'all, and kind of gets us to the open discussion point where wanted to help field any questions. I know there might be a couple new faces or faces that have been gone for a little while on the call today, and just kind of have general discussion to help answer some more fundamental questions on indicators of behavior or where we're going or other topics that people are curious about. So with that said, I'll stop chatting for a second and open the floor and mic to anybody that might wish to say something if they do. No pressure intended.
Hi, Charlie. It's Brian Lee here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you, Brian. How are you, sir?
I'm good now. It just strikes me there's an infinite number of correlation workflows you could come up with there, or
Well,
I'd say a very large number anyway.
there could be. Now, that said, one of our key hypotheses is to start working on be able to show a lot of many-to-one relationships for behaviors. The Power View analytic probably isn't the best one yet, but we really want to, instead of like making a specific campaign set of behaviors, I really want to show a abnormal use of existing executables tied to abnormal use of valid accounts, those type of chains, and more repeatable detections that aren't going to be changing that drastically. And so that's kind of our end goal. And similarly to build, start looking for things like some abnormal network connections from certain devices. That's why we were excited about some of the identifying emergent network behavior, because I think eventually we can start capturing things like when our firewall attempts to log into a user machine on a network and things like that. And so that we're looking to hopefully get the correlation workflow families down to something a little bit more manageable.
You're
But
not
yeah,
considering AI at all to do the correlation, no? Or
I would
something?
love to. It is an open area of our research. We haven't gotten deep on that yet, but it is one of the places to try and take this. But I think it's important at this stage in it to get some more operational insights of using some of the examples that we have made so that we can start looking at how to collect the right training data for an AI.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
No, thank you, Brian. Hi.
Hi, I just wanted to say hello. This is my first meeting. I was so happy that I
Welcome.
was actually able to attend because IOB is something I've been thinking about for like a couple of years. And I'm glad that there's some work. So I'm looking forward to getting involved. I'm at Cyber Threat Alliance.
Oh, wonderful. We're
yeah,
big fans of what y'all have been doing.
Oh, excellent. I might be able to
and-
get some data.
I would
Okay.
love to follow up with you. Have you joined the IOB Slack channel yet?
No,
Okay, let me
IOB Slack channel.
here. I'm in the chat. I'm going to get you a link to our main GitHub page that will include the Slack link.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Just making sure I bring up the right browser tab because the struggle is very real. Alrighty. So the README on this page will have some links to get the IOB calendar, mailing list, and Slack channel. And hopefully this link should let you join the Slack. And then we are the just hashtag IOB channel there. And I'll be glad to
Perfect.
follow up. Just make sure, Linda, is that?
Yep.
Okay. Sometimes first names, last names get swapped around,
yeah.
so I like to check. But yeah, Linda, I'd be glad to kind of follow up and share with you, because in the early days of this research, we were having some chats with CTA and Unit 42, but
Oh, okay. Mhm.
but it's come a long way since then, and would love to discuss, because I sometimes come off a little mean on indicators of compromise. I think there's a big value of sharing those at the right speed and volume, but basically, I think the big value is in y'all's membership at CTA, where you have the infrastructure to ingest and process these things at very large scale. And unfortunately, I think a lot of smaller orgs are reading reports and trying to copy IOCs that are 6 months stale, and it's not getting those folks to where they need to. It's very powerful in the right places, but I think a lot of folks are using them in the wrong places. And so that's why we started this project.
Yes.
Cool. But no, welcome.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
That's all I had to say.
Oh, well, always glad to hear it and glad to
For a
have more
moment.
people. And then, I did leave off one other minor piece of news for everybody. We have been getting some community feedback into the Styx extension repository on GitHub, where we manage IOB, and we've been looking to incorporate that feedback. So just making it known that if anybody here or in the larger community has thoughts on this and wants to see stuff different, we're always receptive to it, and we work hard to incorporate things in as much as we possibly can. And always grateful as we get towards the end of another year to have the support from the community, whether that's through changes on the GitHub, participation in events like CASP, or just attending these meetings and telling me what ideas you think I might be wrong on, because I'm always open to hear it and always willing to keep trying to help make this better. So that said, I'll do one more pass around the microphone to see if anybody has anything they wish to say, and then I will wish you all a happy end to 2024. All right.
Thanks, Charlie.
You're welcome, David. I was supposed to say, take a solid beat and silence as happy concurrence, and just saying thank you all very much for what you've done this year to help us, and looking forward to bringing out some new capabilities for the future. So with that,
Great.
I will
Thanks a lot.
turn.
All the
You're
best.
very welcome. Same to you, sir.
Bye-bye.
Happy
Thanks, everyone.
holidays, Charlie, and all.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.